Today we're going to be discussing Franco Rosso's Babylon from 1980. The film is essentially a few days in the life of Blue, a Rastafarian DJ in South London in the late 1970s, and is a snapshot of his daily struggles to survive. It's almost like a genre, isn't it? The sort of British working class
slice of life movie.
But I mean, just adding into that the unrelenting racism that he faces like throughout every day, it's such an absolute grind. I mean,
Yeah, it's not kind of a polemic film. There's only a couple of places where it kind of states what it's trying to say boldly, and the rest of it just feels like a really nice kind of relaxed slice of life movie. But with all the kind of I don't know, all the kind of like nicely captured detail of time and place and location and everything. But it just is the fact of the matter that for young black men in Brixton in the late 70s, it was just, as you say, a relentless grind of racism and
yeah, that's it. As if like survival isn't hard enough, when you're broke and you're young and you're sort of struggling, but just adding all that extra kind of the just
shit.
Yeah, and they're not even like the sort of clan cliche of American politicians. It's like just people in their prejudice. I grew up around people like that, and it never really comes from anything other than just like ignorance.
Yeah, ignorance is the key word. I was thinking about it. At that age, I was up in the north of England in a town which had, I think, 3 black people in it, and one of them was my grandfather. So it was even weirder up north, where there's no kind of daily experience of black people being there. It's just ignorance taken to another level. It's ignorance without experience, which is even worse.
Yeah, sure. So this was your recommendation. You recommended it to me, and at the same time, I had 2 other people that recommended it. As soon as it hit, I think Netflix and Amazon, I just got a bunch of recommendations, even from one guy, Gabs, who I haven't spoken to in about 6 years, just sent me a message. He was like, dude, you got to check out this film. It's so good.
And I think it's going to blow up now. It's available for free.
It is like really good. It's a really good kind of snapshot of time and place, like you said before.
Yeah, it's a lovely time capsule.
Yeah, I used to live in Brixton, and it definitely, I think I'm the midpoint between gentrified Brixton as it stands now, this film, and somewhere in between. I was there in 2000 to about 2009 or something. So yeah, I definitely, I don't know, felt a little bit nostalgic as well.
Yeah, I remember Brixton from that point, because it was like gentrification was well underway, but there was still a rough edge that
yeah, that's it,
hadn't been completely crushed yet.
Yeah, it hadn't reached Brixton Market at that point.
Yeah, at the risk of repeating myself, it's the same old story as a lot of films that we've covered in this. It's something that my ears kind of pricked up when it got a remaster and a re-release in about, I think, 2008 or 2010, somewhere around back there. I remember seeing the posters and missed it, and then when it came out on Blu-ray, I was kind of quite intrigued. So picked it up, started watching it, wasn't in the mood after about 15 minutes, put it on the shelf, and then it sat there and gathered dust. And it was only last year when I was going through all those movies that I kind of watched it on a Friday night with a couple of drinks and just fucking loved it from start to finish. I think everything about it works really, really well. So I was onto you about it then, and then it's kind of picked up momentum since then. But it's weird, in doing a bit of research on this, you realise that it's already a cult movie and we've just missed it. We're just blind to it.
Yeah.
It's already got like a big following online, and it seems to have had a following in print over the years. And
yeah, and doing the research, like you say, there's like bootleg VHSs being passed around South London. So great that it has a cult audience, but also it's such a kind of strong, important piece of cinema at the same time that it deserves, it deserves to be in the kind of British pantheon of classic cinema. It's that good, I think.
I mean, I don't want to make a documentary, but should we go into the background of who made it and how it was made? We should mention, actually, that a lot of our research has come from that website that you found, the fan website.
It was uncarved.org, which is a music blog and has a massive archive for Babylon on it. And then the other one was the American Jewish news website called Forward, which has a really in-depth interview with Martin Stellman talking all about Babylon and Quadrophenia. Both of those are excellent resources. Yeah, so, I mean, I'd never heard of Franco Rosso before this, but doing research on him, it seems like after college he worked for Ken Loach on Kes, and then shot a few films. One about the is it the Mangrove 9?
Yeah,
Um, and apparently that was delayed. It was for the BBC, but it was delayed like a year or two
to
because
after the election.
yeah, and because it showed like police brutality and was quite honest and unflinching about its presentation of the police in that movie. And then I think he sort of kicked around for a few years trying to get projects made, and this came from he was working at the Albany Theatre in Deptford doing like youth workshops, and so was Martin Stellman, the writer.
Youth theatre for what he says were regarded as hopeless kids. And then whilst they were working in there, there were also some of the kids hired out the hall for sound system gigs.
Oh yeah, okay.
But at the same time, there's a church at the bottom of Rosso's garden that used to have them every Friday
Oh yeah,
till
okay.
late at night. So that was his first direct experience of it.
Right, right.
Yeah, and then Martin Stellman loved reggae and dub anyway, and used to go along and be like the only white guy at some of these sound system gigs. But he kind of got away with it because, as he says, at the time he had this massive, glorious Jew fro, as he calls it. Yeah, and they got kind of talking to the boys at those gigs and kind of put together a proposal for a play for today.
Yeah, wasn't it that they wanted to do a kind of a black British version of Mean Streets, something that was kind of authentic and from the streets and about youth culture and that sort of thing?
But that never happened. And then eventually it was developed into film projects for the National Film Finance Corporation,
Oh yeah, okay.
which is basically taxpayer money. And then Chrysalis Records funded it to the tune of £30,000 as well because they were involved in licensing the soundtrack.
Oh right, right.
So it has a budget of £372,000 as opposed to Breaking Glass, which had 2 million.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of that went on the crane shots.
I think Stellman was introduced when the project was developed as a play for today. Stellman was introduced to Frank Rodham to potentially direct,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't work out. But I think Stellman went on to Quadrophenia from this as well.
Yeah.
So I think that there's kind of three interesting movies to look at: is Quadrophenia, Breaking Glass, and this. As like a snapshot of the tone of films that were being made. Like looking at youth culture. Quadrophenia was one of those movies that my parents bought me a VHS of when I was like 14, 15, and they were like, this is what it was like for us. This is our youth. This is our youth. And, I always kind of loved it, but, I think it does kind of...
It's not made in the moment, is it? It's kind of like a romanticized version of...
Yeah, that's it. It's a little bit nostalgic, I
Yeah.
think, whereas Babylon just feels like really authentic, like you've just been dropped into that moment, and yeah, it really kind of breathes.
As a sidebar, do you ever feel like you're just tangled in a web of coincidence? When I was researching this, at the same time, I watched that documentary about Vilmos Zsigmond that's turned up on
Oh yeah, okay.
Netflix, I think. And they have a round table in the middle of that with lots of top ASC DOPs with Vilmos talking about his work and stuff.
Oh yeah,
And
okay.
you've got Haskell Wexler there and Caleb
Mhm.
Deschanel. And there's also Stephen Goldblatt, who was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
DOP on Breaking Glass.
Oh right, yeah.
And then when I
that's
was researching this, I find that he was one of the 4 cameramen on the Mangrove 9 movie that Franco Rosso made.
Oh really?
You just
Okay.
think it's all happening at once.
It's all connected.
Oh yeah, sorry. And in the spirit of that, one of the producers on this movie is Gavrik Losey.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Again, I looked him up and thought that name seems familiar, and he's the producer of Little Malcolm.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was also production manager on 3 other movies that I watched last year. So you just feel like you're in the centre of it all. He production manager on Melody, That'll Be the Day, and Stardust.
They're all connected.
And it's photographed by the legendary Chris Menges.
Yeah, I mean, he brings something special to this, doesn't he?
There's so many points because I've watched a fair few low budget movies from the early 80s recently,
Sure.
and there's so much to be said for having an actual professional director of photography with
With an eye.
an eye and the technical ability to get the shot.
Yeah, and just to kind of get the exposure right on the kind of the black faces, and a fair bit of it is kind of point and shoot. The limitations of the spaces that they're shooting are quite obvious, but whenever there's a chance to find some beauty, it's there. And the cutaways. There's one quite early on which is just a focus pull across a vinyl record on a turntable, and it goes from the needle into the reflection of a neon lion sign up on the wall, and it's just like this precise, beautiful cutaway that, I don't know, just elevates it for sure.
I mean, just on a basic technical level, I mean, this has a fair amount of night shooting, doesn't it? But I've seen a few movies lately which, okay, so maybe they're shot on 16mm, which is a different matter, but they're just barely getting the exposure in the
Yeah,
shot.
yeah.
It's just like a sea of grain, a black and grain, and you
Yeah,
think,
yeah, sure.
oh, come on. So you've got that plus of, this is a fairly low budget movie of somebody who's shooting it proficiently, but yeah, with an eye for interesting detail and great composition and lovely, lovely use of lighting and colour. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
available light, I'd say, for a lot of it, but
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my favorite sequences is Blue has been chased by the police, battered, and chucked in the back of a police car, and he's coughing his guts up, blood coming out of his nose and mouth. But you have this kind of really gorgeous sunrise happening through the window. It's like the counterpoint, isn't it, of a new day dawning, but you don't know the struggle that's happening for some people. It just kind of does so much storytelling and is like beautiful to look at and tragic at the same time. It's just, as you're watching, you're just like, okay, yeah, a master at work.
I'm going to take a step back from that poetry, which I totally agree with. But I just think as well that whole sequence with Blue walking at night or early in the morning,
Mm.
and then being chased and stuff. Again, this is something you see with low budget movies. You just kind of shoot what you can get and let the audience fill in the rest. So I can imagine on another movie you might just be shooting what you can get at the time, but with that it's carefully shot and carefully lit and carefully exposed, so you get like the progress from night to day
Yeah, yeah.
throughout, and it's that sunrise that's kind of like the climax of that whole sequence, but everything
Mm.
is timed and lit just right
Yeah, yeah,
to
for
show the
sure.
passing of time,
Yeah,
which
yeah. There's no kind of breaks of continuity or
no.
handheld flashes to bridge shots that don't work. It's all, yeah, very carefully done, like you say.
One of the things I liked about it is that it does have a structure, sort of a three-act structure, but again, because it's such a slice of life movie, it feels really kind of deceptive and easygoing. There's no exposition at all anywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
You're just left to pick it up from incident and character detail, and most of what I enjoyed about it was that it's just a pleasure spending time with these people and watching them do what they do. So you're just enjoying that so much you don't really sort of notice the plot progression.
Yeah, yeah, and I would imagine at the time, I don't think many people outside of London had much experience of Rastafarians and that culture. The Bob Marley record, I think, most people had that. My parents had that. But I think, the point was just to show that the Rastafarians were normal people and it wasn't anything to be afraid of. I think there's something about that sort of trying to create empathy.
It didn't feel for me like it was focusing on Rastafarian culture, or even that Rastafarian culture was like a focus of their life. It was just the music that kids were into. It's like you could, if you'd made a movie at the time, well, say Breaking Glass or something, it would be about punk and new wave because that's what kids were into.
Yeah, sure.
And if you're a black kid, this is the music that black kids were into at the time. It's kind of the focus of their fun and leisure and stuff, but it's not. I wouldn't have said that like the whole Rastafarian culture is a big feature in this.
No, but like it felt like they were just trying to show this culture that's part of Britain in a way that it's non-threatening for people that are afraid of things that they don't know about.
Well, it's the best way to do it then, is just make it a slice of life movie about likable characters who happen to be black.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And they're super like nice, energetic, youthful characters. And I think by the time we get our first kind of hint of the racism that they face day to day, we're definitely on their side.
Yeah, definitely. We've spent half an hour at least hanging around with
Yeah,
them
yeah.
before that sort of thing starts to happen. So I did kind of break it down into rough acts, so you sort of get into trouble towards the end, determining where Act 3 starts. But so the first one is obviously like meeting people and seeing places. I'm gonna get a little bit airy fairy now.
Okay, do it.
The first half of this movie has got some amazing, not just time capsule images of South London, but images of a lost time. There's between this and a scene in another movie that I watched, it made me realise there's times and places that are gone, and I don't just mean that in the nostalgic sense. I mean specific combinations of light and sound and smell, which will never be there again. Like there's a bit later on where they break into a school to nick a speaker for their sound system. And you can see the school and you can almost kind of smell the dirt and the brasso and that sort of thing. And
Yeah, sure.
and you realise that schools aren't really like that anymore. That era has gone.
Yeah, yeah, the linoleum floor and Victorian brickwork and layers of paint and yeah, the kind of those bloody pineapple cubes in the urinals. All of that stuff is gone, isn't it? Right? It's
Yeah.
all.
And there was another movie which is a recent movie, but it's set in the 50s, and the production design was pretty good. And there was a scene in an office with, three big desks and typewriters. And then it came back to me, again, the smell of an office where there's lots of ink and paper
Yeah, sure.
and possibly people smoking and dust in the carpets because you don't get
Mm.
carpets in offices anymore. That kind of atmosphere and environment doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And I went to the library the other week, and I realised that within my lifetime we probably won't have libraries which are big rooms full of paper, which will smell of paper and
Hmm.
dust and age. That won't be there anymore. So getting back to the real world, there's moments in this, scenes of South London, and obviously places of nostalgic and architectural interest. You can go to the real locations websites and see what's not there anymore. But there's lots of stuff in this, in particularly the way that it's shot and lit. I love kind of London in winter with that slight blue mist in the air and that winter light, and the colours look subdued but vivid at the same time. And
Hmm.
they're just kind of captured on that specific film stock as well from 1979. And it's just little snapshots of things, which feelings and atmospheres which aren't there anymore.
Yeah, you can smell the kind of the traffic, can't you?
Yeah,
Those kind of God, I can't even remember what the petrol was called. Is it 4 Star or something?
yeah,
Petrol.
sounds
That
familiar.
it's the pollution basically that
Yeah.
that you're nostalgic for. Is
Again, this film gets a gold star for me because it's set in 1979, and if I could live in a time loop forever, it would be within London in 1976 to 79. Say, I could
right,
just go,
okay.
I could just explore that over and over and over and over and over. And that's
Uh-huh.
partly nostalgia because I spent 6 months living in London when I was seven in 1978,
Oh yeah,
and it was
okay.
super exciting. But yeah, I could just live in that forever. So this movie is like a little a glimpse of that.
Yeah, yeah. Another one I always reference is performance. Obviously, it was before my time, but what I love is the wide shots of the city before they cleaned it up.
Yeah.
So every building is black. It's black from soot and exhaust fumes and smoke and all of that stuff.
Mm.
And my granddad was from Ealing, but after the war moved out to Essex. But we'd always kind of come in and out of London. So yeah, that's how I remember it as well.
So my next note is specifically at the sound clash, the first sound clash where Ital Lion are playing.
Yep.
You get a really nice sense of the intimacy of it. Something I was really surprised was that the artists are actually on the floor in the crowd.
Yeah, it's really cool, isn't it? Yeah.
And then after the show, which you don't usually see, with the lights up bright and the room looking pretty dingy and just hanging around with girlfriends and
Yeah, yeah. Borrowing money, blues
borrowing money
borrowing
and
money.
scoring wheat.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then like dropping the gear as they're going down the stairs. It's one of those kind of to me, to you sort of silly. Just this whole film is filled with those kind of little human moments where you're just like, oh my god, that reminds me of, and
Mm.
it's very good at kind of humanizing all the characters and
So here, I guess we meet the characters. Blue, who is he's the MC, isn't he, for the sound system?
yeah, they get the backing track, which they call the dub, and then he does the.
Toasting over the top. Yes, it's Brinsley Ford, lead singer of Aswad.
Yeah, I mean he's so good in this film. As soon as I watched it, I was like, right on the IMDb, just trying to see what he'd done after this, and that's pretty much it, right? He does a few kind of little TV roles, but no kind of lead roles after this, and he's so good and so kind of natural on screen, and his energy is fantastic, and I just expected him to have a massive film career after this. Maybe he went to the States or something, but no.
Yeah, but he
he's
did
kind
have he did have a massive music career taking
yeah,
up
sure,
his time.
sure. Number one internationally, and
Mm.
album after album. But I think I don't know about you, but growing up, the Aswad songs I remember
Don't turn
were the
around.
hits. Yeah, exactly. And I never really thought much of it. But when you hear this, the more defiant Aswad sound,
Yeah.
it's really exciting.
So we meet Blue, meet everyone else there. Is Beefy there? He is. He must have
Yeah,
been.
yeah.
Beefy's my favourite character.
He's cool, isn't he?
It's
I
my
think
favourite performance.
he's sort of he almost feels like the comedy sidekick, but he's so kind of raw with his emotions and kind of reacting to the racism. He's so like
what is
not going to take it. It's not taking that shit.
that's the thing. The really nice thing about it and the way it's written is that he's constantly having his dignity injured, not just by racists, but by everyone he comes across. His mates take the piss out of him. The rival sound system blokes are always needling him and taking the piss.
Yeah, yeah.
He gets it from every side, and the really nice thing about his performance is that, okay, so he's got his injured dignity and he's trying to keep his cool and everything. He's constantly being embarrassed and annoyed, but that really, really feeds into his kind of simmering anger. So it doesn't feel like when he's reacting violently to kind of racial taunts, he's not just going, well, I wouldn't say he'd be going over the top, but it's not just that that's causing it. It's the fact everyone's fucking on his case all day, every day.
Exactly, yeah. He just snaps, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Twice. There's the brilliant one where he goes after the racists and they have to pin him down.
Really pin him down.
Yeah, to stop him like throwing somebody off a balcony. And then at the end when Shaka's giving him shit as well, he just brings out that massive machete in the sound clash and everyone's like, whoa, beefy, beefy. And you just think, fucking hell, man, if they didn't hold him back, you know, he would chop that guy up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know where it comes from, don't you? That's the thing. It isn't just a spike for us to kind of watch as the audience. We totally empathise with his frustration.
There's lots of nice little pop culture touches at the time, stuff that young people would be wearing. Like Beefy's wearing a Rocky t-shirt when he's working out.
Yeah.
Scientist has got his Nostromo cap on from Alien,
I know, yeah.
which would just be brand new at that point.
Yeah, exactly, because the film probably came out while they were shooting, right?
Yeah. I actually, when I was watching this for the first time, I was trying to, because I knew it came out in 80, but I was trying to work out when it was shot, and then there's a bit where Blue's waiting in the tube station, so you can see a poster for the black hole on the tube wall. It's like, right, so this is late 79. So Alien, I think, came out in December 79 in the UK. And then we've got Ronnie, who's Carl Howman, who's a very, very familiar face, but it took me, I know I'd seen him in That'll Be the Day and Stardust last year, but I was trying to place why he was so famous. I think he's in a load of ads, but then is he in Brushstrokes as well?
He was in Brushstrokes,
which I've never seen, but I know.
Oh no, I used to love that. It had like a Dexy's Midnight Runners soundtrack, and it was just about him being Jack the Lad, picking up all the girls. Yeah, I used to love Brushstrokes.
Well, it's thing knowing that he's in Brushstrokes and knowing that his most famous role is in a sitcom, you'd expect it to be a fairly broad performance, but it's really nice and really subtle and relaxed, isn't it?
Yeah, I did read that during the rehearsals, he was kind of quite dismissive of the prejudice that the black characters face day to day. He was like, no, this had never happened. This is not real. This is too far-fetched. And I think they took him out and just kind of showed him the truth. And afterwards he was like, yeah, all right, I got it, lads. Yeah, I understand now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to focus on him too much, but it's a really lovely, he's a really kind of likeable guy. And you can see, why they tolerate him, because he's just kind of quite nice and affable. And I like the fact that he's not trying hard to be black, in quotes. He's just enjoying himself. I like the fact that he can't smoke weed.
Yeah.
There's a bit, I think, about halfway through where, Blue offers him a joint. He says, I don't want it. I can't take it.
Yeah.
Which, as somebody who can't smoke weed, I find that quite appealing.
And they're working at a garage where Mel Smith is the proprietor, which caught me by surprise, seeing long-haired Mel Smith.
Just on the cusp of superstardom, Mel Smith. You just would have wondered, because I looked at his IMDb and he did, he was in Bloody Kids as well the same year, that very strange, bleak Stephen Frears film. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if he hadn't become a comedy superstar, if he would have continued doing slightly edgier material.
The other character I really love, who again is peripheral, but is kind of holding the whole thing together, is Dreadhead.
Archie Poole.
Yeah, he has so many great scenes where he's just like, come on, man. That scene where they go and see Fat Larry to buy a dub to use at the next sound clash.
Well, now, sir, it's a serious business you're dealing with now, you see? It's true and exclusive to me, you understand?
And this ganja here, exclusive to I.
Import, straight from Jamdown.
Sure, what happened, song, man? This not backyard, It's a serious business, me I tell you. No, man. This is where you think you are. Trenchtown? This is Brixton. And it's £50 I want for each of them tune. £50 each.
I suppose it makes perfect sense, but I had no idea that it worked that way, that you'd have to go and get ripped off to buy the latest tunes.
Yeah, that's it. It's like £50 for a tune, and he's like, he doesn't have it, does he? So he gives him like a bag of weed and some cash, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll take your necklace too," and just kind of really fleeces him, doesn't he, for this tune? But that, you know, that is that tune that they carry all the way through the film, waiting to kind of bust out at the end.
Then you've got Beefy getting needled by the rival Jah Shaka mob. Again, there's a couple of bits in this where there's really nice kind of music edits or use of music on cuts. We were just talking before about the scene with Mel Smith in the garage, and there's a bit where at the very end of the scene where Blue's lighting his blowtorch, and you get like a musical motif on that, and you cut as it comes up. And there's another bit as well where Beefy's just been had the piss taken out of him by a rival mob, so he goes over to smash their headlights.
Yeah, he takes the hammer.
Yeah, and there's a really nice kind of like, I think it was called a syn drum, like a synthesized drum sound they used to use in dub tracks. Used on both of those breaks.
Like that. The next sequence I really like is when Dreadhead brings the track that they've got from Fat Larry back to the lockup, and they put it on the sound system.
Oh yeah.
And they just like start dancing and jumping around, and everybody's kind of in, and you just get this, I don't know, this, it's just like about being young.
Yeah, the film comes to life at the same time because it's fairly static, and then as soon as they put the tune on, they start dancing, the camera starts moving around them.
Yeah.
And it really comes to life with them.
It's just so much fun, isn't it? You know, you just remember like being young and playing music too loud and dancing, and yeah, just absolutely love it. And I think Beefy's nicked a video camera, isn't he? It's not even plugged in, and you know, they're just like messing around.
And it's Beefy and I think Errol arguing about it. Like the whole argument's kind of done in a single take.
Oh, they're silhouetted in the foreground, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really, really nice sort of close-up, almost silhouette in the foreground with everything going on in the background. It's just lovely composition.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's just one of those things, again, you know, where you've got like an imaginative director and a great DOP. You shoot something imaginatively rather than just shooting shot, reverse shot and bolting it together.
Yeah, no coverage, is there? It's just, yeah, elegant composition.
And I guess this is the point where we meet the racist neighbours who live near the lockup.
Look at you, good for nothing, noisy, stinking filth, lazy. You're everywhere. Jungle bunnies. This was a lovely area before you come here, lovely.
Actress called Maggie Steed, who I recognised, and it took me ages of scrolling because she's done tons and tons of stuff, and she's still working to this day. But it took me ages to find where I knew her from, and she was in Shine on Harvey Moon, which I remember from the early 80s.
Yeah, right.
She was Harvey Moon's wife. But she's a loathsome character, but it's a really nicely judged performance, or nicely written, because she's spewing bile, and you have no sympathy for her, but you can tell that she has a pretty pathetic life. She's got a pretty rough life generally, and you feel sorry for her generally as a person, but at the same time she's just unforgivable because of this
she's
shit.
kind of angry and scared at the same time.
Yeah.
It is kind of, I don't want to say sympathetic, but yeah, like you say, you do understand who she is from that.
And she does that thing as well that Trevor Laird manages, that if you can it's really difficult to do, but if you can express constantly injured dignity that you're trying to fight for throughout your life, she thinks that she's standing up for herself and dignifying herself by what she's saying. And she's not. She just seems, you know, genuinely pathetic, and in a way sort of not sympathetic, but pitiable as a result.
Pitiable, yeah, that's good.
It's a great performance.
Yeah, and there's a nice exchange between those two where she says, "Go back to your own country," and he's like, "I was fucking born here," and it's always been a tip.
So I've got sort of Act 2 kicking in here. I round off Act 1 with that burst of racism, which kind of sours things a bit.
Yeah, that's it. We kind of know the landscape at this point, don't we?
Act 2. So playing pool and Beefy's dog. Again, I don't want to kind of labour the point. This is one of those scenes where Beefy's just having the piss ripped out of him for no discernible reason. I don't understand why that dog's funny.
It's a massive dog with a tiny head.
It's a huge dog with a tiny head, and it's dribbling a bit, but it's a dog, you know.
Yeah, I know. But it's his rocky look as well, isn't it? You know, he's got the grey tracksuit. He's got the butt-kissed dog that he's dragging around. You know, you can see that what he wants to do is get respect from everybody around him. And even like some white kind of shyster turns up, doesn't he? And is giving him shit at the same time. They're just like, oh dear, poor Beefy. I did like, there's a scene just before this with where Blue's mum calls him at Elaine's and asks him to come home and help get his brother to go to school. But then the dad comes in and like just batters this kid with a rolled up newspaper, and you're like, oh yeah, that's 70s parenting. But there's a really nice exchange between Blue and his dad, where his dad's realised that Blue's quit his job, and he's like,
You just throw away a good job there and you don't even care.
See, they don't care. Rest that, man. Listen, you do your thing and just allow me for do mine.
Your thing. Fucking call it weed and song system, your thing.
Yeah, I'm man's herbs, man, and use a white rum and betting shop, man. So what happened to that? Everything are cold?
No, sir. It's 2 man inside, yeah. And one at work and one not work, you hear me?
If you look at it on paper, it's just kind of like the stock nagging father thing with that generational gap. But it's the fact that it's kind of delivered in West Indian patois that gives it that extra sort of wit and that edge to it as well. It's really, really good. And I do like, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but when things get quite dark later on, when Blue has to leave home, his mum's told his dad that she spent something like 200 quid to bail him out. And there's the argument going on between his mum and dad in the kitchen. It's really, really nicely judged in that Blue gets out of the building just as that argument feels like it's about to escalate. You wonder if there is a little bit of violence lurking in the background as well, but it's not made explicit at all. Do you want to talk about Rastaman?
oh, the walking flag of Ethiopia, they call him. The guy walking down the street. Yeah, he's cool, man, isn't he? If it wasn't such a horrible look for white people to kind of grow dreads and
let's make no mistake, it is a horrible look for white people to grow dreads.
Yeah, it's really horrible, isn't it? Yeah.
The guys are sort of taking the piss out of him as well. He just seems like a pleasant, harmless eccentric, like almost a slight figure of fun as well.
Yeah, but it's nicely seeded for later on when Blue is kind of, he's lost all kind of support and a sense of security, and then he stumbles into the Rastafarian church, and suddenly, there's this kind of connection to his roots, and suddenly the whole idea of Babylon makes more sense.
The next major section is my favourite section of the film. It's Lover's engagement party.
Oh, yeah. I love it. He hasn't even told his mum he's getting engaged.
You open with him kind of hiding in the bathroom, terrified to even go along to this thing. He hasn't invited any of his family along. He's just got his mates along, and nobody knows that he's engaged to get married.
And he doesn't tell them when they're on the bus where they're supposed to get off, so they've gone like 10 stops past, haven't they?
There's another of those moments, flash of recognition that you'll never see that again in your life, the kind of smoky, steamy top deck of a bus. And I guess this is a personal thing. As an older man, again, I'll never see that in my life. I'll never again be on the top deck of a bus going somewhere with my mates being excited.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen to me again. So it was doubly poignant. But yeah, they go along to this engagement party that his family don't know about, and it's in a fairly depressing, brightly lit church hall.
But it has my favourite shot in the whole film, which is just a shot of Sandra and her parents waiting for Lover to turn up, and just the look on all of their faces is it's so good. I could hang on that image for ages. It was so just really set the scene, the tension is brilliant.
There's so much told so subtly in this entire scene. It's got this kind of semi-documentary feel. I mean, I'm just going to go through some moments, and if you flag up any others.
Yeah.
Like, I love Lover and his fiancée. Like, they look excruciatingly embarrassed and uncomfortable with the situation they've suddenly found themselves in. They're barely even speaking to each other. I get the feeling they don't really know each other that well. But then it pays off later, because you get to see a moment of them together, and they're kind of like, although they're shy, they're kind of smiling at each other. You can tell they really do like each other, and you think,
very much
they're
so.
Probably going to get on all right, these two.
I loved when the dad's talking about the date that's been set for the wedding, and Lover obviously has no idea, and you see him just like look over at Sandra with just like, oh my god, what's happening? This is like, it's just out of their control now. The old people are involved and they're pushing it forwards.
I'd love to know who played Sandra's dad, and if he was a professional actor, and I'd like to know how that dad's speech was shot and how many takes, because it feels like a non-actor doing it in one take with all of those perfect inflections and misphrasings of things and faltering wording and all of that. And then the fact that the mum kind of coughs at the beginning of the speech over him talking. It's all those kind of like perfect moments that you get with a non-actor that you'd have to spend 18 takes to get from an actor.
And he ends, doesn't he, by saying, we've got plenty of Carlsberg, plenty of mutton, and plenty of rice. I was just like, I want to be at that party.
I want to be there. Like, the scene really warms up, like the music kicks in and everyone's having food and drink, and it's, you know, everyone starts to relax a little bit. And you can see Lover and Sandra, you know, a bit relaxed with each other.
There's a nice flash of Ronnie dancing with Sandra's mum.
Yes. And I really like Blue and Elaine. Clearly there's some tension between them, but that whole thing of the tension between them and it being kind of eased and sorted out is all played without dialogue. It's just purely body language on the dance floor.
It's a really nice kind of Scorsese moment as well, where the camera's on a nice track moving in towards them. You're just like, okay, there's your tracking shot. Really nice. I forgot during the dad's speech where he said, you know, we've only known Lover as lover or lover man or lover boy, and he says, you know, so happy that my daughter is engaged to Norville, Washington, and just kind of drops his name in, and everybody's in hysterics. Such a great kind of movie name, isn't it? Norville, Washington.
So yeah, so I guess it's clever structuring and writing that you have such a warm kind of like friendly, relaxing scene, and then when you get back to the lockup, you got the racists barracking them from their balcony.
Yeah, and it's just that lovely moment with like all the guys stood around the van like laughing. You know, there isn't even any proper dialogue. They're just kind of laughing and sort of giggling, and you know, it's just really kind of joyous and about the camaraderie of these lovely guys. And then boom, this kind of bottle is flung at them from the balconies above, and we're reintroduced to our racist family.
Again, I've got to know about Beefy's kind of suppressed anger boiling over. He's constantly disappointed and disillusioned with the way that people treat him. So this is Blue's first soul-searching walk, I guess.
Yeah.
Again, I've got the note here, the thing that I mentioned before, the lovely sort of carefully timed continuity of shots. You know, the early morning going from dark to just pre-dawn. That lovely kind of lambent blue light you get before the sun comes up. And apparently they had the same advisor on police tactics and brutality on this as was on Tony Garnett's Law and Order, which isn't legally available anymore, but you can get it off YouTube, which I've still it's a groundbreaking 4-part exploration of basically corruption at every level of law and order, made about 1978.
In one of the interviews I read, they were saying that when he was advising on the scene where Blue is chased by the police, that they used to kind of anticipate that moment. It was like, you know, just this kind of delicious anticipation, waiting to see if the black youths that they were trailing would run or stop. And when they ran, it was like this adrenaline burst. And it's like, I don't know, like the hounds going after the fox. I did have a note from this when they were shooting the sequence of Blue being chased by the police, that they had to reshoot it when a pony bolted across the road, and apparently all the rag and bone men had been moved out of their houses and into tower blocks, and they used to leave their old nags outside the tower blocks to graze on the grass overnight while they're filming this night shoot. So he gets arrested, his mum bails him out, and then he ditches home, and I think he's going to go to Elaine's, but she's not there, so he ends up just kind of walking the streets, and for like a day and a half in the end.
Strange, well, I mean, it's amazing eye candy for me, where Blue goes up west with William and Rupert.
Yeah.
Meets up with some guys and just goes up west in the car because he's got nothing else to do. But, Soho in 1979, shot by Chris Menges.
Sure.
That's all you need to say, really. It's amazing.
It looks like, is it Las Vegas, the name of that?
Yeah,
penny
on
arcade?
Wardour Street near Hammer House.
Apparently they shot it through a prostitute's letterbox, and they paid her off for an hour while they filmed the wide shot.
Oh, right, okay. It's an odd little section, isn't it? I was completely taken in by the setup. I thought we were going to get to see a little snatch of gay life, but it's an odd thing, and it's the only sort of, I know it's not a polemic that the film agrees with, but it's the only time where you get kind of like somebody stating a manifesto to camera, which has some bearing on the situation. I didn't mind it, to be honest. Black men.
Yeah, you're talking about, is it Wesley when he just starts talking about, this is survival, this is what it looks like. It's quite a cold-blooded speech
it's
about how
basically
the
like
establishment works.
a dog-eat-dog world, isn't
if
it?
you want to get ahead, you have to be scum, like the establishment is basically what he's saying.
Listen, man, sure. Hey, fool ambulance, just make them know. Listen, man. So, will you never tell me saying you them thing, them, man? What? About what? You're mugging on them kind of thing, there. Is that what you're on about? Look, how do you think all these politicians, all these police, these blokes driving around in fast cars, how do you think they get so high? They got to step on someone's feet. Survival. Money's money, ain't it, mate?
But to Blue's credit, he's kind of, that's not his choice.
He's not on board at all, is he? Yeah. Then he heads home, and he and Elaine have an argument. I really like the kind of relationship between Blue and Elaine. It's very modern, and Elaine is Beverly Michaels, really, really nicely understated performance. She's not strident, and she's not pushy, and she's not standing up for her rights, but she just quietly
she's
doesn't
just like, don't take the piss,
and states her case.
I've been good to you. Why are you taking the piss? It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
And also, she kind of pulls him up for us as well. Is that why are you being so regressive about this? Why are you being so territorial? I'm not your territory.
Yeah, I think that scene. I think you're with Blue as well, and he's like had this knackering, exhausting kind of experience, and then he's almost like made it to bed, and he's so horrible to her. She's just like, go away, leave me alone. And he's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Where am I going to go now? Like, he's run out of options.
But it's really nice the way they don't, Blue isn't presented as an idealized kind of figure here, because he's a victim throughout, but he's not, he's not a saint in himself.
Well, he's real, isn't he? He's authentic.
Yeah. This is Blue's proper long, dark night of the soul. There's a really nice dolly shot across the bridge after he's left Elaine. And then he finds his way to the Rastafari temple, which has a really nice sort of, I suppose if you've been up all day and all night for 2 nights, it would have a semi-hallucinatory quality to it. But there's a really nice breakdown of kind of Rastafari beliefs as they relate to Blue's situation.
To the east, Africa. To the west, Jamaica, first Babylon. To the north, England, second Babylon. Babylonian triangular captivity. Man traveled down many roads, in many directions. All of them roads that man take, all of them journeys that man make, is but deceptions and vanities. Vanities and vanities that make man can't step forward out of Babylon. First leaving behind him the dirty filthiness of this dirty, corrupted and wicked Babylonian society.
I had to check Babylon in the dictionary just to make sure I understood this new definition, and in Rastafarian, the Rastafarian definition of Babylon is a contemptuous or dismissive term for aspects of white culture seen as degenerate or oppressive, especially the police.
So immediately after the scene with the Rastafari temple, Blue gets back to the lockup and finds that the sound system has been smashed up and the place has been trashed with racist graffiti all over the place, and it's clear who's done it.
Just for a flash, I was wondering whether it was Shaka, but then when you start reading the racist graffiti, you're like, okay, no, that wasn't Shaka.
And it's the absolute low point of the film.
You're gutted for them, though, aren't you? Just like it just it makes you feel sick when you're looking around. You're like, who the fuck did that? Well, like, why would you do that? It's so petty and spiteful.
I think we should talk as white viewers about Ronnie's role in this. I think it's incredibly well written, and I guess it's a timelessly well judged depiction of how unimportant, I guess, a white person's reaction to this is.
Yeah, sure.
Bearing in mind this is like written and directed by 2 white guys, there would be the temptation to kind of play to Ronnie as being kind of like, the kind of token liberal white guy. And he is, he does and says exactly the right things, but the guys are so angry with him, they just don't have any time for it. And to be honest, it's basically, yes, he's disappointed, and yes, he'd be upset, but his reaction to this is
irrelevant, really.
It's irrelevant, yeah.
He doesn't have their experience, and you see that in the garage where he's working with Blue, the fact that Ronnie turns up stoned, can't do his work, goes home, stitches Blue up and gets away with it. He hasn't lost his job, but Blue, even just pushing back, just trying to take a lunch break, ends up in a confrontation with the garage owner and loses his job because he won't compromise, and be insulted. And all the way through, we see that Ronnie, he's sharing their experience, but he doesn't have that kind of depth of understanding, that sort of unrelenting oppression that these guys have to deal with every day. And so, yeah, like you say, his reaction at the end, it's irrelevant.
And I think it's very interesting, and absolutely commendable that a movie made by two white guys doesn't follow up on his reaction. It's just it's not relevant. It's not what the movie's about.
Yeah, I mean, you say kind of two white guys. There's reading up on Rosso and Stellman. Stellman says that Ronnie's character is a kind of stand-in for him and his own experiences being a kind of I think he calls himself a passenger or a tourist in this world, so he knows that's, and was always pushing for authenticity from the cast to kind of bring that out in the film. But he was or is a British Jew who grew up, and I think both his parents were deaf, so he grew up speaking sign language and was already kind of outside of, let's call it, mainstream white British culture. And the same with Rosso, whose parents fled Italy during the Second World War, brought up as the kind of the eye-tie of the class, had an accent and stuff. So I think they're both kind of outsiders from mainstream society of the times. That sequence in the lockup, it ends with Ronnie on the floor with a broken nose after Beefy's headbutted him, and then the guys all leave except for Blue to go and find a new sound system for them to perform with in the evening. And the last kind of shot, or the shot that stands out for me, is this moment where Blue is just stood in the corner against a black wall with all this white racist graffiti around him. It says black bastard, there's a swastika and NF written. It's just you just feel this kind of horrible, oppressive reality that he's living in, man. It's really grim.
I guess we do now get to what is, the key reaction to racism in the film. Blue storms up to the balcony and hammers on the racist door, and seems like he's getting no response. But then as he's walking away, the big loudmouth dad comes out and starts insulting him. And then at this point, how do you feel? Do you think it's too melodramatic, or do you think it feels right in the moment? Or
yeah,
I mean, I feel bad watching it, because there's always the worry watching something that you're watching a dramatic construct, and you're thinking, okay, are they doing this because they feel they have to give you this kind of dramatic confrontation to finish the movie, or does it feel right?
I think it feels right. I think
it
if you're
feels
in
a little
Blue's
bit...
head, if you've experienced everything that he's experienced just in this 48-hour period that we spend with him in the movie, if you imagine that's his entire life up to this point, at some point you're just going to snap and strike back, aren't you? And I think that's what it smacks of for me. It's just that retaliation. It doesn't matter who it is. You just got to fight back. You just need to hit something, make somebody suffer for that.
It's tough viewing though, because that the rest of Blue's life is over at this point. He's going to get caught. He dropped the screwdriver with his prints on a few steps away. No matter what happens, and fairly exuberant next 15-20 minutes of the movie, that's the end of his life. So it is kind of a downbeat moment. I put a note: is it too dramatic? Is it too pessimistic? But the fact is that you come away worrying more about Blue's future than you do about his victim on the floor. So where your identification is, don't you?
I really don't care about him.
Yeah,
being stabbed once with a screwdriver. I'm sure he's going to be fine.
On a technical level, I really, really like the fact that there's no kind of interim. You cut straight to the gig, so you're straight into the next point of action.
I think we get a couple of nice shots of Blue travelling from the lockup to the gig, and he has that kind of slightly spaced look on his face, where also it's that kind of last night on Earth as he's on the tube and just kind of looking at people in their freedom and just thinking, oh fuck, I think there's a little bit of that resonating.
The sound clash at the end of the movie has one of my favourite musical moments of all time.
All right, wow.
They come from here and here over the decades, and this is one that I was watching it last year, and I was like, oh my god, that's one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. There's a bit in this gig where one of the other MCs or technicians on the sound system is playing a syn drum, one of those early kind of tunable synthetic drums, and it's really distorted, and he's kind of tuning that on the fly and playing it along. It sounds amazing. It's one of the best things I've ever heard.
I read an interview with Brinley Ford, and he was saying that, you know, he'd kind of petitioned to do the dub for this sequence and hadn't got it finished. So when they shot this sequence, they shot it mute, and he was just like, I'm going to bob my head and wave my arms. Everybody follow me. So he said the room was totally silent until he started doing his kind of a cappella singing. And and he said he was like a conductor of a silent orchestra, getting all those, and crossed his fingers, and when they laid the track in at the end, it fitted perfectly.
You got some aggro going on in the crowd. Jar Shaka's scene that he was quite unhappy about.
Yeah.
Did you read that?
Yeah, he couldn't divorce himself from the artifice of making a film. He was like, I'm not going to lose. I can't lose a clash.
There's a quote on the Uncarved website. There's a quote from an interview with Jar Shaka where he's saying he agreed to appear in it, but then he was very unhappy with the scene because he didn't think that kind of aggro went on. And he kind of says some years after the fact, I really disagreed with the director, and I had to direct myself in that scene.
Oh, yeah.
But again, despite disagreeing with it, he still comes off as quite aggressive, and he's needling poor Beefy, who then does the wrong thing again, pulls a machete.
Well, Blue arrives, doesn't he? Blue arrives to join in. Kind of, I think Loverboy is given the mic to start, isn't he? Just as Blue arrives, and we get that nice kind of, you know, again, a little Scorsese moment following Blue as he enters the venue, and people are there looking at him like, oh, he's here. And then he picks up the mic and just drops straight into that. We can't take no more of that. Like, and just does it as a kind of chant, doesn't he? It's amazing. So hypnotic.
Yeah. And it's you can tell this is one of the high points of his life. This amazing, exultant performance, and everything's going right. But of course, you've got the police trying to get in, not able to get in, and then in a really nice touch, rather than give you this kind of climactic charge from the police, the film just cuts to black just as they
it's a
smash
proper
in the
kind of
doors.
70s ending, isn't it? Yeah, you don't need any more than that. You've kind of, it's built up to that point, and the rest of it you can piece together yourself. Apparently, this section is based on Dennis Bovell, who did the score, his experience of being busted at a sound system. He spent 6 months on remand in prison because they said he was inciting a riot, but he was just emceeing. And when they were looking for an ending, he was like, look, this happened to me.
And there we have it.
So good.
Yeah, one of the best British films of the late 20th century, which is still fairly little known, despite a massive, strong cult following for decades.
So Franco Rosso passed away about 5 years ago, but I think he was at least around to see its kind of re-emergence as an important piece of British cinema. It must be so frustrating to create something that powerful and to expect it to really change the world, and then it gets suppressed. I mean, they gave it an X rating here. Yeah,
it's fucking crazy, isn't it?
I think the people that needed to see it the most, it was just like kept from them, and that, if anything, highlights how afraid the establishment were of it as a piece of work. I mean, that X certificate is outrageous.
I hope that now it's on Amazon and Netflix at the same time. It's going to break through.
It's incredible. It's such an important piece of cinema. I mean, I think the most frustrating thing is how relevant it still is today. 40 years later, it's so frustrating that so little has changed.